pretty.
Oops, sorry, I hit the button. Hello, folks. Howdy, folks. Happy Friday. Thank God it's Friday. Jan was jumping the gun there a little bit, but that's not unusual. Start.
Wow. I'll hang up now. Thanks. Bye. Gotta go.
We'll start with Russ with the pre-show.
So, every once in a while there's those Twitter questions that create some debate, and I thought this would be a good one for a Friday, and that is, who do you think? And we'll just keep it to baseball. We're not going to do all sports. Who do you think would have been a Hall of Famer had it not been for health or injuries?
Yes.
And so that's always a good debate. And certain players are now trending. And so, Mike, you can go first.
Yeah, I mean, I saw it was funny because I saw the mention of Don Mattingly's name in my trends, and I was fearful that whenever you see somebody's name right now, you think they have COVID or something untoward happened. Because I'm a Yankee fan, that would be the first one that I would go down the road of, because if he hadn't had those back injuries between, I think it was 88 and the year that he retired, which was 95, I think he would have been. I think he's a borderline Hall of Famer right now. So if he would have had 2 or 3 more good years, I think he would have been a Hall of Famer. Another one that was mentioned, which I agree with, and his drop was precipitous, was Troy Tulowitzki. He was on path to getting 3,000 hits, and then the injuries hit, and that just completely derailed him.
Jan?
Well, I mean, I think Russ and I probably share the same name, given that we're Met fans.
We can't hear you.
Right? If Wright,
I could hear him.
Can you
hear me?
Hear you?
Yes, we could hear you. I think Mike can't.
Oh, never mind. Sorry.
It's Mike's speaker.
Okay.
Operator error.
It was my speakers. It was my speakers.
We already
I think Russ and I probably share the same name. One of them, at least, is David Wright. I mean, I think both of us will admit that if Wright didn't have the back injury, well, originally the hamstring injury, which came from the spinal stenosis, and as somebody who has stenosis on both sides, that he found that after he got unfortunately hit by a car back in 2015, that I know what it's like to kind of recover from that, and he had it on another level because of the play he made at third base with trying to make the tag and then sliding into second. I think he would have been a Hall of Famer. And another one from the Mets side of the house where there's a variety of circumstances associated with it, health being a small part of it, but unfortunately drugs.
No, don't bring up drug guys. Don't bring up drug guys, because it's only health, and that's it. So if their career got derailed because of drugs, forget it.
That's their fault.
I mean, the other guy I would have said is, and part of it is a different circumstance, is Strawberry. I think if he actually stayed in New York, Russ, I think he would have been a Hall of Famer. As he said, moving to LA was the biggest mistake he ever made in his career. And if you look at his first 5 to 7 years, he was clearly on pace to end up making it.
There were a couple names that I'm really, because, and
I'll give you mine.
Go ahead.
And then we can throw out some others. Now, this one might be controversial in the sense that some people believed he did steroids. I didn't, because of the way he played and the way he batted. And I'm going to go Nomar Garciaparra, because I don't think he was a steroid guy. I think he was a bat speed guy. And similar to Howard Johnson, once you, on a smaller frame, have that crazy torque in your swing, it does take a toll on you physically. And if you think about it, Garciaparra was beating everybody there for a good 4, 5, 6 years.
I think it was a combination of things. It was injury. It was also the trade that sent him to the National League, and he clearly had difficulty adjusting to National League pitching. It was
I think the trade came after part of the injuries, though, right?
He was
somewhat of decline.
He was still effective, though, Jan. I had
Nomar in my fantasy league several years, including his rookie year, and I was a huge. I mean, look, in my opinion, in his prime, Nomar was at the A-Rod level at the time at shortstop.
Well, he's a borderline Hall of Famer now, because
I thought he was better than Jeter, in my opinion, Mike, and you may disagree with you. I just think
they were all different players, because for example, Jeter was, I would say, consistent 300, 310, 10 to 15 home runs, good defense, a rock. He was, Garciaparra had the ability to hit 350, and he hit
with power.
With power, but not ridiculous power, not 30 home runs.
25?
Yeah, 25.
But I don't think he was as good defensively as Jeter.
He was pretty good defensively.
He was pretty solid, though. He was.
A-Rod was the best of them all in terms of the entire package: power, speed, range, arm. But then, obviously, I think you don't know when that was enhanced. I mean, the indicators are he was taking steroids as far back as being 19 or 20. So,
well, A-Rod's that's pretty much been confirmed from somebody that I know.
Yeah.
So somebody that I may do a podcast with once in a while. So that's why. But with Garciaparra, if you look at his numbers, and actually what's interesting is on Baseball Reference, he matches up to David Wright. But the issue is he's a shortstop. And as a shortstop, if you go strictly shortstop with a 313 average, with 936 RBIs, with 370 doubles, like those are pretty close to Hall of Fame numbers for a shortstop. I'm sure it's better than Phil Rizzuto. Now, you can make the argument that Phil Rizzuto might be better in other things, and that's fine. And same with Pee Wee Reese. But at the end of the day, Nomar may still get in because he was a shortstop. And at some point, you have to look at the era for shortstops. You can't look at him compared to like David Wright, because David Wright was a more power hitting third baseman than he was.
I'm in the midst of reading Jay Jaffe's Cooperstown Confidential book, where he goes through some guys who should get in. So it's interesting. This came out in 15 or 17, I think 17. So it was before Trammell got it. It was before Trammell got it. It was before Whitaker got Whitaker. So it was interesting to see some of the names that he proposes. So I haven't gotten to the shortstops. I'm going to be kind of curious to see if he agrees with you on Nomar.
Remember, he only played 14 years. Trammell probably played 20.
Right.
So that's a big thing, too. You can make the argument with him that, yes, his career was cut short. He did have a revival with the Dodgers, but these are pretty good numbers. If I start matching up his numbers against shortstops that weren't in the steroid era, like that weren't hitting ridiculous homers like A-Rod, these numbers would hold up against a lot of shortstops. That's all I'm saying.
But this is the thing. I mean, I saw some other.
God forbid, I'm really pushing for a Red Sox, but I am, right?
Yeah, it was some of the other.
You won't take offense.
Some of the other names that were mentioned were to the point of being ridiculous, because just because somebody had 3 or 4 good years doesn't mean that they were going to be a Hall of Famer. Like, I saw Grady Sizemore's name.
Yeah.
And I liked Grady.
Although he had tremendous talent. There's no question.
He did. No, I mean, I'll throw out a couple more that I saw. Mark Pryor had 2 good years, and then the injuries happened. There's no way you could assume that he was going to continue at the rate that he was at the beginning of his career for 12, 13, 14 years. Kerry Wood was the same thing. He blew out his arm, his elbow. Yeah,
I'll give you the poster child from when I was a kid. No, not Fidrich, but Fidrich is a good one for this player, and it's Tony Conigliaro.
Yeah.
Now, when he took the shot to the eye, it's interesting because he only played 8 years. If you look at his 162 game average, it's 31 homers, 95 RBIs, and a 264 average, and he was good for 32, 80, 28, 93 almost every year. Even that one last year in Boston, 36, 116, and then just fell off the map. And that's a guy where it's like, damn, he had the talent.
So again, the question is Russ, and we've discussed this, right? That's why some people view Mattingly, right? So look, I'm a huge Puckett fan. You guys know I'm a huge Kirby Puckett fan, right? Yeah. Puckett's career was clearly cut short because of the glaucoma. Yeah. He had a dominant stretch of an X number of years.
Right.
Mattingly also had a 5-year stretch where he was dominant in the poster child.
I think there's an argument for Mattingly.
Or a 5-year stretch of dominance actually is Sandy Koufax, right? Because if you look at Koufax, Koufax's career, he stunk the first part of his career. He had that 5-6 year stretch where he was an absolute monster and beast, where he won all of his Cy Youngs, and then he basically just retired because of the issue with the tendonitis and everything else in his elbow. He is the poster child for a shortened career, but an extremely dominant career, which is where you draw the line of how many years of dominance do you need to make it into the Hall.
Now, do you punish a player like, say, for example, Frank Tanana, who had not Koufax ability, but the equivalent of Ryan ability early in his career as a flamethrower? Then he had the arm injury.
I don't know.
And then he continued for another decade as a junk baller and had like 270 career victories. But he clearly, if he would have been able to continue as that first part of his career as a pitcher, he probably would have 300 wins and a Hall of Fame.
I don't hold it against him, but he's up against guys like Tommy John who are probably a little better.
Jim Cott also.
Jim Cott.
Yeah, Jim Cott's the other one.
Yeah.
Right.
I want to mention one thing about Mattingly that's a little story. So years ago, back in like 2010, I did a signing in New York at Gotham Comedy Club with Leach and Mattingly, and they used my book 100 Ranger Greats, and there was about, I want to say 50 or so people that were there for the signing. And you basically, they told stories, you sat around, you drank a little bit. And it was also on a night that there was a blizzard. It was in January. And so I waited till the bitter end because I was just there as a guest because I was an author. And I go and I take the picture, and Mattingly goes, so, why are you here or whatever? And I'm like, oh, I actually wrote this book. He goes, you wrote this book? That's unbelievable. And I'm like, I in my head, I'm laughing because Don Mattingly said that I'm unbelievable for writing a book, and I thought he was an unbelievable baseball player. So that was it just showed that this Mattingly has this really good side to him that people don't see because he's such a competitor that you wouldn't think he has it, but he really does.
I was a huge Mattingly fan in the 80s. Had the poster up in my room that everybody had in the 80s of the picture with the gun. Of the gun holder with the bat in it. And I was one of those everybody's like, you're a Met fan, how can you be a Yankee fan? I'm like, first of all, Mets and Yankees, Mike, and this is why I don't hate them, weren't good at the same time for the most part, right? They didn't really overlap that much. And B, as a baseball fan, watching Mattingly, watching him swing was awesome. Like they talked about Griffey's swing. Mattingly clearly had a lot more components and parts of the swing, a lot more torque. But when that swing was on, the swing was pure magic to watch.
His swing was perfect for Yankee Stadium. And hey, I mean, I'm a Yankees fan, but I love Keith Hernandez because he was a Cardinal before the Mets, and I wasn't going to stop not being a fan of Hernandez because he was on my most hated team.
As we got to get going, I'm unfortunately having an issue here with my dog.
Nope, that's fine.
He's having some kind of my dog has.
All right, well, let's get as much as we can out of you here.
As much as we can, and me and my dad make families to watch them for a second, and okay. I think he might be okay. He may have just eaten something. You never know. But it's he's got this thing called Addison's disease, which is sometimes he gets like this. We got to take him to the thing.
Believe it or not, I had a dog that had that.
Yeah, that's what my dog has. And so you know what it's like. So sometimes he gets.
I know what it's like.
I know what it's like very well.
This thing too. So anyway, all right, here we go. Let's start. Ready? Here we go. We're gonna do our best here as long as I can.
It's Friday after 26, just so we
Thank you. I appreciate that. Hello, Hockey World. It's Friday, June 26th. 2020.
I'm Michael Agello.
I'm Jan Levine with the barking dog in the background.
Russ Cohen from Sportsology, and I'm glad Eck knew it was June. That was a struggle.
That was a struggle. And I can watch HockeyBuzzcast on HockeyBuzz.com. This is the podcast that comes every Monday through Friday. Today early, because we have some things we got to get to, and we really definitely wanted to be here for this show today. Well, go ahead, Mike.
Yeah, let's
I want to start with something first, actually. Sorry, because I may have to go, so I'm going to start with this thing. Is that all right?
Okay, go ahead.
Because I was talking to some people today, and I know we've talked about the draft lottery inside and out, and it is tonight. We're going to get into those players, too, which I think we should talk about them and how they would fit on various teams. But it was interesting. This morning I heard Brian Burke on XM, and he was echoing something I had heard myself. And he had said basically, he's always been a fan of just whoever doesn't make the playoffs has a chance, and that's it.
Right.
Which is usually what it is.
Yeah.
And this year, it's different, right? So the biggest fear about tonight for everybody is what happens if one of these top three picks goes to the field, basically.
Yep. To the place.
Yeah, because and honestly, the more I was talking to some people about it, and the only reason I think, honestly, and this is kind of funny, the only reason I think that this situation happened the way it is because of two teams that are in the field of 24, and there's the Montreal Canadiens and the New York Rangers. And to be honest, those two,
the Canadians.
Yeah, well, it's in all my dealings with the NHL, and I know
they were further away than the Rangers, a lot
way further away.
No, but it's not just that. It's no question, the Canadiens were further away. It's also the fact that that the Rangers and the Canadiens are two teams the NHL. Everybody else, the NHL seems to be able to get stuff done with, but those two teams kind of run their own game, right. And they are two teams. I'm not going to say the NHL is afraid of them, but they're two teams that have their own, very, very much their own power for some reason. For whatever reason, at the NHL, those two teams have power, even more so than Toronto. I don't know why that is, but Toronto doesn't yield that power as much, but and they do
because Toronto is owned by two media networks.
Right.
Yeah,
they're afraid to exert it.
That could be it, but the people who own the Canadiens and the Rangers, the NHL is always afraid of screwing up with, and I think that had those two teams been obviously out of this and not in the 24, we may have just seen the draft go the way, where the teams who don't get in the final 24 get in there, because the reality is, you can say these teams aren't in the playoffs yet. These are your play-in games. They're playoff series. They're best of 5 playoff series. There's no getting around that, right? And it does suck when you think about it, for these teams a lot of these teams aren't going to, who aren't in this field of 24, aren't going to, those fans aren't going to see hockey for 9 months, basically. Right. It's going to be December before they see hockey. At the earliest, that's 9 months, from March. And the reality, that it's so much more important, I think, that one of those teams get these top 3 picks than anybody else.
Well, for some of those teams, let me just say this, and then Janet, you go.
Yeah.
For some of those teams, not seeing hockey, or for some of those cities, not seeing their teams play hockey for 9 months is a blessing rather than something bad. Yeah, because honestly, would you really want to see the Buffalo Sabres the way they've played this year?
Hockey fans want to see hockey. I mean, it's just, no one can put it on. I mean, unless you're just, that's absurd. I mean, I'm just going to say it because that's crazy. I mean,
you want to see good hockey. You want to
see good hockey, but you still want to see our team playing. I mean,
well, you notice I didn't say the Ottawa Senators because in spite of their problems, they have a young team with a lot of potential. They're right now teams like Detroit's in the midst of a rebuild. Buffalo is a cacophony of disaster right now. So, I mean, honestly, it's better that the Sabres get their house in order over the next 9 months and have a direction when right now they've been just wallowing in crap for the last couple of years.
Well, we'll talk about their hires too later, but
that to me, that's I'm not saying, Mike, that you're not right, that they need to get their act together, but fans want to see their hockey team play. Okay. It's
sure, but you realize that should Pittsburgh or Edmonton lose in the playoffs and get the first overall pick, it will be holy hell.
That's my point here, because we have a very possibility.
Let me ask a quick question though before you get started. So you talked about the 24 teams, right? And the Rangers in Montreal. Yeah. I'm going to throw a supposition out there.
Yeah.
The Rangers were 2 points out of a playoff spot. Let's suspend belief and let's say when the season ended, they were in the 8th spot in the East, right? Would the NHL have gone through these machinations just to get Montreal in? Or do you think they would have gone with the 8? But because there were 2 teams, including Rangers and Montreal, that changed the mindset.
That's a really good question, Jan. I don't know. And I don't know. I want to say that I don't think.
I think it would have gotten expanded anyhow. I just have that feeling.
Well, remember what Kevin said a few weeks ago. He said in a perfect world, they would have done 22 teams because 20 was too few and 24 was too much.
Right.
But
I feel like it would have been expanded anyhow.
I'm fine with the 24 thing. I mean, I think it's great for the world.
But it could be awful in the sense that
it could be
tonight could be great or it could be awful. And we don't know.
Yeah, I mean, 24 teams, that's one thing. Like I'm fine with giving 24 teams a chance to win the Stanley Cup. That's fine. But I think to get it to give teams that have a chance to win the Stanley Cup also a chance to get the top pick is not right.
Well, here's two scenarios for you. So obviously the 3 placeholders, and it's all hell, man, because then it's the worst case scenario for the league. It's the worst case scenario for the panel because they have to explain all the rules.
Oh yeah. It's too confusing for fans.
The second worst scenario is, let's say you get placeholder 1, Ottawa 2, Detroit 3.
Right.
Yzerman's not going to be happy.
No, Yzerman's not going to be happy unless he gets one of the top 2 picks.
Correct.
And honestly, it's like for somebody who is resistant of change, which normally I am, I have very little problem with the way the lottery is set up. And I don't consider the 8 teams that lose in the play-in round playoff teams.
No, but you know what the problem is? The 12.5%. The problem that I have is if you came in and you're one of the bottom 7 and you're at the bottom of the bottom 7, you have like a 3% chance. But just because nobody wins the first round pick in the first phase 1 of the lottery, your chances now are better than teams who didn't finish in the playoffs and you got to play a play-in. That's an inequity that doesn't sit well with me.
And also my view on this is, like I've written a couple times, right? I would have had the top 7 have the shot at the first 3 picks.
Yeah.
And then have the picks with 8 through 14 at the most, maybe the 4th or 5th pick. At best, because then you keep some of the competitive balance and you don't give them an opportunity to move up to the top while also having the opportunity to be in the playoffs for a potential shot at winning the cup.
Right.
Yeah, I think that's not a bad content because what we're really feeling going into tonight is this real sense of like this could be a disaster type feeling to me.
But it's gonna get ratings.
It's gonna get ratings. Yeah, it definitely gonna get ratings. But I mean, the end of the day, like you said, Russ, you could have Lafreniere lining up alongside McDavid or Crosby next year. You could have Byfield as the third center on the Maple Leafs next year. There's all kinds of things that could happen here that are just absolutely absurd. Like neither Toronto, Edmonton, nor Pittsburgh really are any of them going to be able to make a case that they deserved a shot at that?
No, they don't deserve it. No.
They don't deserve a shot at that, and nor would they even expect it. You know what I mean?
But again, I do have to bring this up.
Yeah.
In the history of the draft, the Rangers have never won the first overall pick. How odd would it be if they play in rounds, lose that, and then they win a first overall pick because 3 placeholders or 1 placeholder in the top spot came up? Like that would be crazy.
Yeah. But even in a normal draft lottery scenario, a team like Edmonton didn't deserve 4 first picks in 6 years.
True.
So even in the current system, without the adjustments because of the pandemic, this system is screwed sometimes. So
and if you look at the last few years, right? Look at the number of teams that have moved up, right? Philly moved up substantially. Carolina moved up from 11 to 2 to get Svechnikov. The Rangers moved up last year, I think, from 7 or 8 to 2 to get Kakko. So teams moving up is not an aberration. It's become almost more the norm than an aberration right now, which is what creates further issues and risk associated with the current process that they've implemented because of the A through H.
But moving up to 2 or having the top spot is a big difference because in most drafts, there is a drop-off from the first pick to the next batch of guys.
But last year was you could split it. You could have flipped the coin last year depending on people's preferences.
Right.
Preferences, sure, but not on results.
This also
would Svechnikov have gone number 1 2 years ago? As you look at him right now?
Yes.
Okay, so
right.
But I'm just saying in most drafts last year there was and I think it'll still bear out that Hughes will be slightly better, but in most drafts the number one is better to the point of like 15 to 20 to 30% better than the rest of the field.
I honestly, I don't think that the Sabres would have taken Svechnikov, even if you drafted him now.
Yeah, it's a good argument. Dahlin's still
but talent-wise, they're pretty close to one.
No, they're close. It's a good argument.
Here's the other thing that really bothers me about this. It sets up my other least favorite thing in the world, which is that if we have placeholder teams getting the top pick or the second pick or what have you, are we going to have fan bases that want their team to tank in the play?
Absolutely.
Of course.
And what are you, crazy? You think the Montreal Canadiens fans want to play a play-in just to lose the first round?
I actually,
if they, all right,
there will be some because the loudest will always.
If they're not, they're stupid.
Heck, if I'm a Canadiens fan, if they're going to get bounced in the second round, I want them to have a chance at the first overall pick rather than going to the second round and losing.
Yeah, it's meaningless unless you have a chance to win the Stanley Cup. It's better for the long-term future of your organization to get the best player that you can in the draft and build that way. The Leafs are the perfect example of that. They wallowed in mediocrity for a decade.
Yeah,
and wasted time, wasted the careers.
Actually, I'll argue that the Penguins are the best example of that because
no question.
Because the Penguins put an AHL team on the ice for a decade.
Crosby, Malk, and Fleury in 3 years.
But the Penguins,
the Leafs haven't yet seen the success. The Penguins.
No, but what I'm saying is the Penguins had the good fortune of being bad at the right time, getting Lemieux years ago, and they tanked in that year.
Well, look at how they got Lemieux.
Yeah,
how they got Lemieux, how they got Crosby, how they got
Tremblay.
Well, Crosby was different, right? Because the NHL basically Lemieux, they completely tanked.
Yes,
which is why they got the number 1 pick in Jersey, got the number 2.
Yeah, but you're still overlooking.
The line is they put bad teams on the ice for a long time.
No, but that's not the whole reason. Again, they traded up for Marc-Andre Fleury. If they had just had Crosby and Malkin and never gotten Fleury, they wouldn't have had the same kind of success.
Stahl was a high pick too. Jordan Stahl's another one, right? Like he was also
and Ryan Whitney was like 4th or 5th overall.
Wasn't Jordan Stahl like 2nd or 3rd?
Third.
Yeah.
So to me, all right.
And there's no guarantee picking how you're going to be successful because I think you guys have to post for that also.
Just using
I hate it. I'm just so pissed off because it's like this concept, and that we're gonna have teams that even are gonna fan bases. There's not gonna be fan base. There's gonna be individuals that are gonna want that, and you're gonna sit there and say that logically.
Oh no, there's gonna be fan bases.
There's gonna be fan bases.
I can tell you right now, when I wrote columns, right, I had got about Rangers maybe being in the playoffs. There were lots of guys who said, I'd rather be in the lottery. There were a lot of people who said, I'd rather be in the lottery than have a shot of Lafayette.
There are also, when you go to a stadium during a playoff, during even when you go to games, like, it's very rare. You'll have the people who wear that bags on their heads or whatever and are booing their teams. But for the most part, when the Red Wings scored goals this year, their fans cheered. I mean, people do.
You want to know why? Because they were so far behind everybody that they couldn't cheer.
Even in the past. I mean, even times when the Leafs were trying to tank and the Sabres were trying to tank.
I think you have that completely wrong.
You're telling me that everyone booed every time they scored a goal.
I was at the game and it was late March when the Sabres played the Arizona Coyotes, and the Coyotes and them were battling for positioning for the last pick, and Sabres fans were cheering for the Coyotes to score. Yep. Don't give me that. I'm telling you. I understand that you don't like the trend of fans rooting against their team, but in fact they're rooting for their team because they don't want their team to suck for a decade.
Yeah, right. But what we've seen so far is just because you have the worst record doesn't mean you're getting the number one overall pick.
No.
Well, hold on. I remember last year with Kaka, right? Guys were like, everybody's like, oh my God, we need to lose. We need to tank. We need to get a higher position. Well, look where they ended up and look where they moved up to, right? So there's no guarantees anymore in terms of where you're slotted in terms of where you're going to pick. So I get wanting to be in the lottery and having a better chance, but because you're 1, 2, or 3 doesn't mean you're finishing 1, 2, or 3 in terms of what numbers.
No, but your odds are way better. And the idea is you're still talking about aberrations. That doesn't happen every year.
No,
you're talking about a couple of teams like the last 10 years.
New Jersey moved up, Philly moved up, the Rangers moved up. That's 3 years in a row.
Teams in the last decade.
That's not an aberration.
3 in the last 5 years.
30% is pretty much an aberration.
Didn't New Jersey move up when they got Heischer?
Yes, that's what I said. New Jersey, Philly, and the Rangers and Carolina all moved up. That's 4 teams that all moved up.
Columbus moved up too. Columbus
I don't know if Columbus did. So that's 40%. Fine.
Columbus moved up significantly.
40% is not the norm.
I mean, it's
50%. That would be the norm. Is that our demarcation point now?
You have a chance at a player. You have a chance at a player who could be great, for sure, or you have a chance to win the Stanley Cup, and you would take the chance of the player who could be great over the chance.
Well, it depends on your chances of winning the cup, also, right?
It depends on your chances of a player being great. If
you have a 1% chance of winning the cup, I think most people would say they'd rather take the chance on the guy who's going to be great.
And let's just say this, that being said, getting the first or second pick isn't a guarantee of success. That's Look at the 2017 draft that Russ had, where Heischer and Patrick with the 1-2, and the next 3 picks are all better than them right now. Heiskanen, Makar, and Pettersson.
Right. So if the Flyers and Devils all moved up, they depend.
And look at the middle draft, right? You had middle draft. You had Anderson. I mean, those are guys or people who went further down who have been much better than the guys who went 7. I mean, Velarde was supposed to be there.
Okay.
Right. So you have a bunch of guys in that middle tier of the lower part of the top 10 who also haven't hit.
I understand X's point of view. He's a purist. We're
going to agree to disagree with him always on this.
Because
actually, and there's another thing, Jan. When you're talking about what you're talking about, remember in 2015 they had a major change in the draft lottery odds, so that's why you're seeing more of that now too.
I agree. Right, so it's different now, right?
So
that's the thing. Is get the number 1 overall doesn't guarantee you the number 1 overall.
Right, but what I'm saying is it was manipulated to have these really would be aberrations otherwise.
Right. Yeah, you had to finish. You were limited to move up 4 spots. You had to finish at least.
Well, I think the NHL wanted to quote unquote eliminate tanking to a certain extent to be the worst team in the league because you're the worst team in the league it's not like the NFL where you're guaranteed the number 1 overall pick or baseball where you're guaranteed the first overall pick. Ironically, odds associated with it.
Ironically, the system has changed and they're still tanking because it's still worthwhile to at least get, like, if you're Toronto in 2015-16 and you've hired Babcock as your coach and your team is historically bad and you have no chance of making the playoffs, you're going to tank because you had the chance to get Austin Matthews or Patrick.
I don't think Eck understands the fans of today. And like Jan said, a ton of Ranger fans still wanted them to tank. They did.
And trades like the Jets made or the Bills made to trade up to get Darnold or to get Josh Allen in the NFL draft, those aren't possible in the NHL because teams value their picks.
Right. Remember the Leafs and Sabres were taking their goalies out if they were doing too well.
Yeah, the Sabres traded Jonas Enroth to Dallas.
Right.
You know,
Pittsburgh, because he was winning too many games.
The Pittsburgh Penguins in 1984 when they drafted Lemieux, I think it was 84.
It was.
They signed and they played Vincent Tremblay, an ex-Leaf, who I think his goals against was over 5. It was so bad that they had a goalie who was playing decently, and they sat him and they played Tremblay down the stretch just to get Lemieux. I don't blame them.
Look at what Montreal did years ago. They got LaFleur, right? They got
the draft pick from, I think, the
Golden Seals, right? Yeah. But they also made a trade to another team so that team would do better,
right?
In order so that the Golden Seals got the number 1 overall pick, right? So it goes back 40, almost 50 years where this is going on.
The Leafs did that in 1990. Well, they did that with Quebec in 91 because they had traded. No, they had traded their first round pick to Jersey for Tom Curvers,
right?
And Jersey had the opportunity to pick in the top 3. They ended up picking Niedermayer.
Number 3 overall.
The Leafs didn't have their pick, so they ended up and Quebec wanted to finish last overall, so they got Lucien Deblois, Aaron Broughton, Michel Petit. They got like 4 veteran guys, so the Leafs could be better, so the Nordiques could be worse because the Leafs didn't have their own first-round pick. There's that manipulation. You're always going to have that manipulation. It's going to happen.
Mike, let's talk about the Sabres, though. They had some new hires.
Yeah.
We knew they had to do this because with the draft eventually coming, even though it got delayed for a few months, they hired Jeremiah Crow as their scouting director, and they hired Jason Nightingale as the director of analytics. Now, when you dig into Crow, he'd been with the NTDP, and I had said to you offline, it's great to have an inside track on the NTDP, but this is not the year to do it. Right. This is not their best team by far. Now, I'm sure he's learned a lot of things because NTDP has great training. They train like a pro team. They probably do some things that the Sabres haven't been doing. So from player development, I could see that being a real positive. But what I want to mention here is how it's being viewed as new scouting. So the new approach, and it's going to be more analytics and it's going to be more video. And there's a tried and true scouting formula out there, the 80-20 method. And really the analytics and video is like the 20. And if they make that like the 40 or the 50, it's going to significantly change the way they do things. Now, I'm not going to pan it and say it can't work out.
Right.
But what I am going to say is the guys who did the work and were out at the rinks and looked at everybody for the most of the season,
right,
I would hope that their work counts the most, but I can't tell you it's going to.
And Russ, it just seems to be a trend with the Sabres because, as you mentioned his name when we were talking on the phone, this is what Golisano, the previous owner of the Sabres before the Pagulas, did in terms of going to video scouting because it was cheaper, because he was a very penny-pinching billionaire. And he didn't want, and he apparently he saw scouting as a waste of money. Now we know the Pagulas right now, based on everything that they've done, there's seems to be a financial situation, even though they say that there's not. But and they seem also, if you look at the trend, they hired a first-time general manager. Didn't even serve in their hockey operations department, Kevin Adams, and they made him the general manager. Now they've made a former pro scout the director of amateur scouting, and now I don't know whether the other person that they hired, from the wording of the press release, he was previously in their analytics department, and now he's their assistant director of amateur scouting. So that was like
let's just say this: there's a huge difference, and again, I think the other guy has amateur background, but it wasn't like he was steeped in the OHL last year or steeped in the WHL last year.
Yeah.
There's a big difference between pro scouting and amateur scouting. Huge difference. Like I talk to these guys And I'm telling you, the focus is completely different because you're basically, as pro scouting, you're going out there and you're looking at the next few teams your team's going to have to play. You're putting in reports so you can win the games. You're not looking at the future.
Right. Yeah. I mean, you're like, for example, Dave Morrison, who was the amateur scouting director with the Leafs, he became their director of pro scouting. I saw him a lot at games in Buffalo at the KeyBank Center. He would be in Erie or he would be in St. Catharines watching OHL games. He would not be watching NHL games. The job.
Yeah, excuse me. Sorry for interrupting. I do have to go. Sorry, I got to take my dog to that.
Okay.
We got it.
All
right, we'll talk to you in a bit. Thanks.
Okay.
Have a good weekend.
All righty. All right. Let's the two big stories. I'll start with the hub cities. Pierre LeBrun was reporting this last night and furthered the report earlier this morning. Vancouver is out as one of the hub cities. The Canucks tweeted it out last night. It seems to be more of a British Columbia public health issue rather than the actual bid. Now, LeBrun says that the Edmonton and Toronto bids don't have such limitations. The Alberta government and the Ontario government are fully on board. And according to LeBrun this morning, he said because time is of the essence, we thought that maybe they would put off the announcement until Monday. The NHL could announce the hub cities today. Wouldn't be ideal because the lottery is tonight, but there is a huge time crunch. And players on the NHLPA committee last night discussed the merits of Toronto and Edmonton. The sense that he got is that it's extremely close between Edmonton and Toronto. Both have provincial health clearance. One source involved gave a slight edge to Toronto, but wasn't ready to call it yet. Players will have more discussions this morning and get back to the league. Russ, like I said to you off air, Jan, you first then. I said to Russ,
it is, in my opinion, it is feasible that you could end up with both of them getting, because we've talked about if Vegas has an issue.
It's possible.
Right? And we've talked about one East Coast and one West Coast team. Right? We could end up having both of them. To me, in my opinion, with Vegas selected, I kind of give a slight edge to Toronto, mainly because we've talked East Coast, West Coast, and the number of games that has to be scheduled and the timing associated with it. So to me, although I think in terms of location-wise and given what they've put together as a proposal and kind of some of the amenities they've talked about, I do think Edmonton may have a slight edge from a proposal perspective and what the options and amenities are as compared to Toronto. But I do think proximity in terms of where they're located from Toronto vis-a-vis Edmonton may give them the edge for a final vote.
Yeah, I mean, I would have agreed with that until Toronto made their renewed bid, and apparently, the details of that bid in terms of a complex on the lakeshore called Hotel X that is completely shut down right now. That would be the where the players would stay, as well as access to the Coca-Cola Coliseum, which is right on the C&E grounds, and BMO for working out, and the Raptors practice facility for exercising. I mean, all those things. I just also think, though, that if you leave it up to the players, and I know that the concept here is that they're going to be in the bubble. If it's a choice between Edmonton and Toronto, it's not a choice.
No, but I want to bring
there was no bubble. Didn't that come out today that I thought there was something that really wouldn't be a bubble necessarily?
I haven't seen that.
Yeah.
I'll take a look, see if I can find it. I thought something was tweeted earlier about the bubble.
I do want to mention British Columbia. I get what they're talking about and what their head doctor is talking about, and I don't fault them for turning down this bid. And it's funny because she's like, look, I really want to see hockey, and I would love this to be a hub city. It's just not right for the city based on what we're seeing. And I have to give her credit for that because, again, it's very easy for places to push things aside, and we're going to talk about that in a minute, regarding, the COVID-19 and everything else, just so they could have money in the economy. So this is a good move for British Columbia because they feel like it's the best move for them. I don't slight them at all. I just don't feel like Edmonton's going to win this because they're boring. And again, I know that's a terrible thing to say, but John Tavares came out and said it, and we know players want to have a little bit of excitement outside of the rink, and unfortunately, they're not going to find it in Edmonton.
So here's the thing I was talking about, right? And it gets into what you just said. Deputy Commissioner Bill Daly confirmed Thursday the league and NHLP are not considering putting teams in quarantine bubbles for those mandatory sessions. Instead, players are being instructed to stay home when not at the rink with the hope that frequent testing and health protocols will prevent any outbreaks before hopefully games resume in 2 hub cities in late July.
Oh, okay. So
that's during phase 2. And when you get into phase 4, that's when there's going to be a bubble.
Right. There will be a bubble. But now that you got into that, let's talk about, COVID's blowing up in South Florida. And Mike and I were talking offline. And at this point, I don't think I would have the Panthers even showing up at the rink. Like, again, yes, you can test guys and keep them clean to a degree, but they have families. And even if you're getting food delivered to you, there's no guarantee that that person is asymptomatic or whatever, is not going to pass it on to someone for you and your family, even if they leave it on the doorstep, even if you bring it in, even if you think you're following everything. That is a hot spot. And right now, I would shut down hockey in South Florida until this passes and keep them huddled inside and keep testing them, but I wouldn't have them keep showing up at the rink. I think that's a mistake.
I mean, considering what's gone on in Florida lately, right? And the number, I mean, this is something that I think we all talked about that we expected it to happen when things got lifted, right? Now, again, just because you've tested positive doesn't necessarily mean that, you're not going to be hospitalized, thank God, or you're going to have symptoms associated with it. You said you may be asymptomatic. And
their hospitals
is you are contagious, and you could potentially give that to somebody else who is at a risk factor and could potentially have issues health-wise associated with it. And that's the bigger pandemic concern here. But as those numbers keep rising, Texas is the same thing. The governor announced today they're closing down the bars and reducing occupancy in restaurants. Arizona's been spiking also. I mean, Arizona, Texas, and Florida, the 3 locations that have been open the most recently, but have also had the material uptick in terms of number.
And we have to be fair here. Just because you're an NHL player, if there's no room in hospitals, you're still going to have trouble getting treated, even if you have all the money in the world. And those 3 areas are starting to have that problem. So again, maybe just have those guys not practice for a couple of weeks.
And just because you're an athlete doesn't mean you're averse to getting sick, right? Look at what Von Miller said. He's still feeling some of the after effects and having it. And that's from approximately, I think, 2-3 months ago when he came out. And there's a guy who is by far a world-class athlete. He's used to playing in a higher altitude, so he needs to probably be in even better shape. And he's still dealing with the after effects of having COVID.
Now, Jan, did you mention the NBA report that
no. But let's talk about that.
So the NBA, right? So again, same type thing, right? Just because you've tested positive doesn't mean you're symptomatic, but this is the risk. They announced 3 of the 302 tests they ran, 16 tested positive.
Right.
Grant, you don't know when those individuals got it. You don't know where they are in terms of the cycle of recovery. You don't know if they've been asymptomatic, but this is something that's going to put at risk players playing, right? You look at, Avery Bradley come out and said he wasn't going to play. Malcolm Brogdon tested positive that he is going to play. Nikola Jokic tested positive. He likely is going to play. Now, granted, you don't know you don't know whether or not having the disease is going to, and the virus is going to impact them physically.
Well, Jan, I can tell you this.
The risk, you talked about Florida, right? Orlando is supposed to be the hub.
Yeah.
Is that going to start changing mindsets in terms of where you're going to have players play?
I can tell you one thing about the testing, because I saw it on the show as far as the NBA. So once you have COVID, not only do you have to quarantine for 14 days, you're not allowed to work out, you can't do anything, and they're going to cardiac test you before you can go back into the league. So you're out for like at least 3 weeks, and then you have to try and get back in shape again for the season. So players could say they're going to play, but if you get it, there's no guarantee you're the same player.
Yeah, and just to compared to what the NHL reported last week, which was a little over 200 cases and 11 positives, this is about the same percentage, about 5%. So it's not like out of the realm of what And this is, and again, this
I think Orlando's a bigger problem than the test results.
Yes, yeah, and in the end, it may be a problem because the play. We still have not heard, Russ, the results of that meeting that the NBA players had in terms of it's been basically shut down. Even NBA, even like Adrian Wojnarowski has not reported what the result of those concerns were about the bubble not being a bubble.
And it looks like the WNBA may not even have a season now.
Yeah,
because it seemed like they didn't get all the right information. and they're supposed to be in that bubble as well in Orlando, and so now their season's definitely up in the air. So, we're going to be talking. Right. We don't want to be talking about the virus and be trained on talking points for it, but we have to because it impacts these sports.
Now, also one more thing on this. So the impact also is thinking down the road. If somebody tests positive down the road, or B in general, depending where the hubs are, if Florida continues to spike, you talked about the Panthers, right? They may have to self-quarantine wherever they go to, which means they would have to travel earlier than expected in order to be eligible to play when games resume.
Right. Well, the Toronto Blue Jays may run into that problem in Major League Baseball because apparently they can't practice in Dunedin because of what's going on in Florida, and they can't get approval right now from the Ontario government to hold spring training at Rogers Center. So there's been some talk, and I mentioned this a couple days ago. Their AAA facilities in Buffalo, it's over the border. And maybe until they can get their situation straightened out in Toronto, they could do that. But I'm assuming they would probably have to. They don't own the Bisons; they'd probably have to pay the Bisons to be able to use their stadium and use. Their
It's going to cost them money, and they're already losing, so they don't want to do it. But you're right. We talked about this the other day in regards to the Blue Jays, that this is a big hiccup. And again, the only reason we're mentioning it on a hockey show is while all these plans seem great, there is potential for pitfalls and hiccups and changes.
Yeah, and here is the good segue to lead into the potential pitfalls and changes with the NHL. Artemi Panarin comes out yesterday on Twitter, and I'll read the statement because it's brief. It says, "I'm very much looking forward to the playoffs with the New York Rangers. I have concerns not only about the health of players and their families, but also the long-term prosperity of the NHL. For nearly 2 decades, the players have been protected the owners' income with escrow." Artemi, you clearly don't know what the hell escrow is. Including through this pandemic crisis, even as owners' equity continues to grow exponentially. It is time to fix escrow. We as players cannot report to camp to resume play without already having an agreement in place. We are all in this together. Also, I know the process for selection of the hub cities is ongoing. I seriously wish that my teammates and I could train and play games at MSG and bring employment and economic opportunity safely back to New York City for Ranger fans and for all New Yorkers. There are so many things wrong with this.
Like who wrote this for him? Let's start with that.
It must have been Alan Walsh, because I've never heard something more clueless in my life than this crap.
I mean, clearly his agent probably wrote this because, again, this is not Artemi Panarin speaking. This is somebody getting to him and saying, hey, look, you have a chance to maybe enforce some change here. Do you want to do it? And he probably said yes. And then they worded it for him. But at the end of the day, the risk with Artemi Panarin is always going to be about money. He's always been about money. That's why Chicago saw the writing on the wall with him. And he is more about money than he is about escrow. And, the health part I get, right? That's fine. The MSG part, that is clearly him probably having talked to James Dolan saying, well, I have an empty arena, and it would be nice at least if we could get paid as being, for something from the NHL for operating. And if nothing else, he gets people back to work. So again, this whole thing read like a commercial. This did not ring true.
Jan?
I have a slightly different view. So granted, escrow is clearly an issue, right? And we can gloss over it as much as we want and hope that there is a CBA. But you know as well as I do that we've both thought that the players have kind of gotten screwed a lot of times when it comes to the escrow. And they're the only sport where an escrow is required. Nothing else really has an escrow associated with it in terms of the other sports. So Panarin may have been influenced in terms of putting his name associated with what was been written there.
Right.
But the fact that Kessler came out, and granted, you need somebody a way more higher profile than Kessler to come out.
Yeah,
it's an impact. But certainly an issue, and is written by Brooks and written by Elliot Friedman. The players are still getting shafted to a certain extent on the escrow, given the value that some of these teams have, and that's been the case for several years in terms of the negotiation.
Yeah, but
the NHL and the NHLPA.
I see. I don't agree with the fact that they've been shafted. It's based on 50-50 breakdown of hockey-related revenue.
What's the hockey-related revenue, Mike?
They don't know
what is it. What is HRR?
It's defined in the CBA,
and it's a poor definition, in my opinion.
Well, I mean, that's what
If
negotiations
Seattle's
are.
throwing in X number of dollars, that's not showing up in hockey-related revenue, Mike.
No, but the 50 contracts that the players are getting for Seattle is
but the money's going into the owners' pockets that are coming in from Seattle joining the league.
Okay, but let's be real about this year. This is the wrong year to bring up escrow because the players got their checks. The owners are getting nothing. Hold on. The owners are getting nothing in the playoffs. They're getting TV revenue, and that's it. They're not getting any ticket money or anything, and the players have mostly been paid. This timing is poor on their part.
And
I mean, maybe poor, but again, part of it gets into the CBA that in negotiating where we're looking. Remember, the cap was supposed to go up. Now at best, we're looking at a flat cap, and we're also looking. Again, the interesting part's going to be whether or not you have that 10% holdback, quote unquote, on salaries that get paid down the road. And I wonder if there's any going to be conditional language associated based upon what happens in terms of revenue associated with the league as to whether or not you get the 10% back.
I mean, they clearly do not understand what the hell escrow is because they seem to think it's essentially what it is they don't know what hockey-related revenue is until the end of the year when it's calculated. It's calculated by both the owners and the Players Association. So they, it's not like we can say, oh, we think we're going to make $3 billion this year. Okay, we can judge it on that. No, you have to wait until it's calculated. So
and you know what? And Jan, to be honest, revenue is not going to be any better next year. It's going to be better than this year, but that's it.
Well, again, I think as you said, as Mike said also, right, it's very up in the air as to what that's going to be because depends on when sports restart, depends on whether or not you can have fans in the stadium, depends on when the season ends, depends on if you're going to have players. So again, you need to have cost certainty on both sides of the equation, right? And both sides have to give a little bit. But I would say right now, look, I'm not always on the player's side, but I also admit that the owners, based upon their position, have always held the hammer, as given from we've seen in the past what free agency used to be and how that got changed a little bit. So I'm not always pro player. I do think, though, that the definition of hockey-related revenue does need to have some modifications to bring it more in line in terms of what's gone on in the sport the last couple of years.
Fine, then talk about it after this season ends. Talking about it 2 weeks before training camp is a very bad idea.
And remember, though, the key, though, is, Mike, one thing is the vote is a simple majority. We both talked about the NFL vote, and look how close that vote was, which clearly is an indication that not a lot of players was in favor of that vote. So I'm very curious to see if it does go to a vote, just how close the vote's going to be.
I would not be surprised if this was because Alan Walsh came out and made a couple statements, and of course I couldn't read them because he's blocked me, and I
can send them to you. It was in Greg Wyshynski's article.
No thanks. I've already gone to the bathroom this morning. But this is of course he is biased because this is where he's getting his money from is a percentage of the contracts that he's signing, and he sees the next few years of free agency probably drying up because there's not any money to really spend. And then according to Elliot Friedman, he says there is a potential for a 6-year CBA agreement. Then, as you said, Jan, there's going to be a vote. It will be not only a vote for the CBA, but for phases 3 and 4. And I think this was done to sort of cast that in doubt and maybe to get a little bit of better negotiating position on certain issues, because the NHL doesn't want to go down all this road of preparing for hub cities and spending money for this and getting everything ready and then having it shot down like baseball did with their union, shooting down not a collective bargaining agreement, but an agreement for the season. That would be such an unmitigated disaster for the NHL that I think it would dwarf what the effect is going to have on baseball. I think it would be a disaster if the NHL shot down the CBA and shot down the season because of this crap.
Right. I just think this was bad. Now, we do have breaking news. If people have been watching for the last week, I had talked about mid-range players going to the KHL. Mm-hmm. Another one just went, Mikhail Vorobiev for the Flyers. And now this is an interesting one because the average Flyers fan is going to say, well, they tried him twice. It didn't work out. Well, he's only played 35 games in the pros with the Flyers. He's been playing with the Phantoms. You will hear little things like, hey, he's a little headstrong, whatever. But we're not there in the locker room. We're not there with the coaches. So a lot of that stuff goes on. But this kid's talented, and he's a center. And I'm sure the Flyers would rather have him than not have him. And I think he went for about $500,000 American, something to that degree, but it's a 3-year contract. So again, this just goes to show you now how mid-range to lower players, but guys who they feel like could be stars in their league, are going to start to get poached from the NHL. And Flyers fans can say, hey, you know what? He's not in the plans. A couple of injuries and he would be in the plans, and now he's not.
And good, Jay.
I wonder if there's any kind of opt-out in that contract.
Yeah, we don't know.
Yeah, and I did see
We don't know that.
I did see a piece from Arthur Staple regarding Sorokin, but I read it and I really didn't learn anything more about it. Everything is still in limbo right now. And that's not a shot against Arthur because
he was guaranteed to go there.
Yeah,
remember he was signing the next day, Mike.
Yeah, it's a shot. It's a shot against the situation because nothing has happened in 3 months. Nothing has changed, and I have to ask whether.
I pretty much told you that that's what was going to happen, though.
Right,
and he still might come. But
right, but I'm wondering whether it's just simply the intransigence of the New York Islanders and Lou Lamoriello to not guarantee that he will not play in Bridgeport, that he will be their number 2 goalie. And if it is that, if it's the fact that they won't guarantee it, then I'm sorry. You know, I lose a Hall of Famer. He's a great guy. But in the modern day, you've got to give bonuses for contracts and you've got to give players guarantees.
Yeah.
Great.
So I'm not sure. Now, do I think that Panarin's statement and even more Kessler's idiotic statement, Ryan Kessler, who hasn't played a full season and he's been getting full pay. So I don't understand his viewpoint. I mean, he's not even in the NHL anymore, basically. So why should he have a say so about this? I don't think this is going to happen.
Hold on. I mean, Chris Chelios hasn't been in the NHL for a while either, and we've heard him spout out many times.
That's true. That's true. So touche. Where will this go in terms of? Well, do you think that this will have a effect on the vote that it could lose, or do you think this is just?
No, I just think it's going to cattle prod a vote now rather than it being the majority, so they could flesh it out. And I just think the timing's poor on it. Clearly, the wording is not in Artemi Panarin's own words. That is obvious. And that, to me, loses a lot of validity when you're trying to make a case like that. And again, I'm not sure he's the greatest guy to make that case. I get he's a big name, but if you go back into his past, he has always wanted to get paid. So it doesn't shock me that he's a guy that says, oh, I'm only getting $11 million instead of my $14 million. That's a big problem.
He did take a mild discount technically to go to the Rangers.
Come on,
mild. I say mild.
Just
what I do think, though, is I do think that it will, as you said, Russ, flesh out some of the issues that have to be discussed. I do think there needs to be some clear guidance in terms of escrow and the impact of escrow, and also the definition of hockey-related revenue, so that all the players are aware of it, as opposed to just those who are the representatives that are in the return to play. And then lastly, I do think this will end up narrowing the vote to make it a lot closer than maybe it would have been originally. Although, look, a 6-year CBA would be welcome to all of us, because I think all of us are tired of talking about the CBA and the potential for another strike down the road.
Even forgetting that, Jan, Mike and I were talking about it offline. So let's say this one supplants the 1 year left on the other one, so it's a 5-year in essence, right? Players have to look at this and say, if you think the sport is getting back to the revenues where they were last year in the next year or two without major changes, like meaning other things they could sell fans without simply raising prices, you're crazy. Yeah. And that's the part that they have to look at. Year 3, yes, the NHL could start cleaning up again, but there's a lot of things that have to happen before that happens. If I'm them, I'm running to sign this CBA.
Well, I think the big piece is going to be the new TV deal, right? So if you're talking about revenue streams, that, in my opinion, is going to be the biggest revenue generator.
I can tell you this: Rogers Sportsnet's not paying the same money they paid last time.
Well, theirs isn't up yet. It's the American contract.
Oh, when is theirs up?
They've got another 4 or 5 years.
Yeah, they have a long-term deal. But again, I think the American one, and there's several things rumored, several TV networks rumored and mediums rumored to be potentially in the mix, as we talked about, right? So that's the one where if you're going to see a jump to get you back even to flat, that would be the thing that would get you back to it.
I'll be honest, I don't think ESPN has the money to compete with NBC.
You're going to see multiple platforms. You're going to see NBC. You're going to see ESPN, maybe a TNT, YouTube. Or you could see.
Right. I could see
CBS
Amazon getting it. Amazon might get into it. I could see.
Okay, finally, let's just make a quick prediction here. Not that it's based on any,
what, that you're going to wear gray on Monday? It's a guarantee.
That's 100%. Thank you, Russ. No,
coming from the man who's wearing a gray T-shirt right now.
Yeah, he's known for it. 2 days in a row.
That's his trademark.
Mike's on a streak now.
Mike is vanilla. He wears gray.
He's on a streak now.
Of the 6 teams that have the chance to win the first pick, who do you think will, or do you predict that the number one overall will be one of the 8 play-in teams? Jan?
As much as I'd love to go off the rails and say it's going to be one of them, I still think Detroit's going to end up with the number 1 pick.
Russ?
Ottawa.
Yeah, that's the odds on because they have two kicks at the can.
Yeah.
If
they don't, you might see rioting in Ottawa.
You might.
I'll go off a little bit off the board and say the LA Kings, which with their core of young players now, if you add Lafreniere,
they'd be scary. Wow.
Yeah, but I can guarantee it's not going to be the San Jose Sharks. Okay, for Jan Levine, who has not yet departed, and for Russ Cohen, I'm Michael Agello. Thanks for watching, and remember, without the buzz, it's just hockey.